This is the Good Fire Podcast. Stories of Indigenous fire stewardship, cultural and social empowerment, and environmental integrity. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Good Fire Season 2. This one's a little bit different than the last 5 you heard. The last 5 were all new people that we had just met and just talked to this season. This one is an update from someone we talked to last season. We're talking to Don Hankins. We talked to him last season about all the kind of stuff that he was up to, and Amy and him got together to get a bit of an update on what's going on in California.
Yeah, there's so much exciting things that are happening there, and I know that Don's episode on fire and water was listened to by a lot of people, and so, yeah, just wanted to bring him back, get an update on what's happening there. They're forming an Indigenous Peoples Burning Network. They've got the new legislation that passed. So really exciting times. So it was, great. Thanks, Don, for meeting and chatting about all the exciting things that you're up to.
Yeah, no, it was cool for me to listen to too, even though I unfortunately couldn't make that episode. But thanks a lot, Don. We appreciate it. And without any further messing around, here's the conversation with Amy and Don.
So Don, can you just introduce yourself for people maybe who didn't listen to your season 1 episode? And they should definitely go back and do that.
Joaquin, Awasit Don Hankins. My name is Don Hankins, and I'm Plains Miwok. And Muco is how we say it in our language, down in the Central Valley of California. So if you're familiar with the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, that's homelands for me. And I am currently in Coyamcowie country in the Lassen Foothill region of the Southern Cascades.
Awesome. Cool. So your first episode on season 1 was about fire and water. I remember we talked about that a lot, and you have some new initiatives going on. I know one is the Indigenous Stewardship Network. So just wondering if you could give our listeners just an update on that, what it is, and what you hope to see in the future.
Right. So fortunately, we've got a lot of initiative taking place within the state of California over the past few years, I guess maybe unfortunately because of the types of wildfires we've been seeing, but maybe fortunately also because of the types of wildfires we've been seeing where people are recognizing the place of Indigenous fire once again for our landscape. And so one of the things that's come out of that is a stronger desire to support capacity building for Indigenous peoples to re-engage with fire. And so a couple of years back, I guess, going back to like late 2019 timeframe, there was some initial funding interest from some philanthropic organizations, and I guess I could name them, the Hewlett Foundation, the Resource Legacy Fund, and the State of California's Department of Conservation in particular, came together with the idea to fund some effort to help to revitalize fire in the state. And so through that effort, I became involved as a co-lead for that effort to start to make outreach to tribal people across the state and begin to work on the revitalization of fire, to support that in a variety of different ways. And one of the ways that we did that was to initially start out by just reaching out to people we knew within community who were already engaging in either actively burning, who are traditional knowledge holders and were actively burning, or folks who we knew were cultural bearers, looking to advance fire back into their stewardship practices within their own homelands. And so we started out with a set of interviews and just kind of seeing like, well, where one is kind of the baseline knowledge around this, and what are the needs that people are seeing. And so we saw that through that work that some of the folks, most of the folks are currently kind of working in a range where they're volunteering to do work of stewardship because it's something that we're motivated to do because we're trying to maintain our cultures. And so, but nobody was really receiving any financial incentive for doing that work. It was strictly a volunteer effort. Through that, we also learned that there are various policy barriers that are there, access to land, access to funding to support this work, permissions to be able to burn if we're not, using our own traditional laws as the guiding for this. So if we're looking at the state's laws and the federal laws, where are those acting as barriers for people to be able to burn? And then we also identified that there was a need for people to be able to train and learn, and they wanted to learn from other Indigenous peoples and have a youth component to that. So out of that effort, beginning back in about June of 2020, when we really started building the inertia behind this, we ultimately decided that through a collaborative effort that we would build a nonprofit organization, a tribally chartered nonprofit organization, meaning that we are not incorporating with the federal government of the United States or the state of California, but working to support tribal self-determination by incorporating with a federally recognized tribe within the state of California. And so as I'm speaking to you, we're waiting for the paperwork finally to come back on that, but we are working to incorporate as the Indigenous Stewardship Network. And the intent is that this organization will work to support the learning aspects of revitalizing cultural fire and other stewardship practices, work to advance some of the policy efforts to support this, and then also work as a sort of a refunding and redistribution entity to make sure that folks can advance projects that they want to do on their homelands. So that's kind of a short response in terms of how we're moving things forward with the network.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I know in Canada, there's a lot of people that want to work with cultural burners. And like I was saying before, we just have such a shortage of people who actually have that knowledge about cultural burning on their landscape. And so I think that that's one thing I see with this network that you're trying to build is just the importance of building up that kind of base and bringing youth in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really the hope is going to be with building and empowering youth to do this. And that's not saying we're turning the keys over to the youth and saying, here, go with it and run with it. We really need to build the culture behind it. So it's knowledge keepers working with knowledge holders, I guess is better maybe word, but knowledge holders working with youth, training them to understand the cultural reasons for burning, the ability to read the landscape, and engaging enough to create the interest and desire to maintain that culture. Because I think when I look at a lot of the places that I engage currently, in like the policy arena and whatnot, I see a lot of adults, a lot of people who are mid to late career, and I don't see many younger people necessarily stepping up into this area. And particularly on the cultural side, I really do not see a lot of younger Native people stepping into these places. And we want to see that. It makes me nervous as I start to move more towards that maybe later career aspect. Is like, am I going to be ready to retire at some point, so to speak? Not that we get to retire from our commitments to our culture or fire, but if I leave the university where I'm working, who's going to step in behind me to fill that role? Who's going to teach that kind of stuff that I teach and engage in the way that I do? And so I'm constantly looking behind me to kind of see, well, who's coming up and who can I mentor around that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes
so
sense.
important. No,
you can edit that out.
No editing on this one. This is a test.
Man. I don't think you edited the first one either.
So yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that and trying to bring, I think we talk about it, I think for you and I, it's just such a time commitment from people. There's just so much interest in this area. There's just constant requests from media, from people that want to learn about fire. And it's super exciting. It can still be a huge demand, just on one or two or three people in this area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But I do think that the media interest has really has brought forth a lot more interest and awareness to the work that we're all doing. Mm-hmm. And I think back a few years, definitely to my early career, but, even going back a few years, there wasn't really a recognition of Indigenous fire. But I think the wildfires that we see, have seen in Australia and California and the Western U.S. and in Canada in particular, have really underscored the recognition that the suppression approach to fire doesn't work necessarily. And we need to be supporting what these landscapes evolve with, and we need to be supporting the cultures around that. And so I think we're living in a really unique time, and I think the media has played a really important role in that. And I think that awareness is tremendously important. And I think that media attention and general public recognition and discussion around these sorts of things is also opening up some of the areas around barriers that like we see. So when we think about, what the opportunities are for advancing fire, we're living in a time that really poses a lot of unique opportunities for advancing things that maybe never would have been on the table, within the past 100 years. And now we're finally at the point where people are willing to at least have a conversation about it. And we may not get everything that we want in the first go of it, but we're starting to get to the point where we can have that discussion and start to shape what direction we're going.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect transition into some of the new changes in California that are looking to get around some of those barriers that you're talking about in terms of, the different laws and legislation that have kept Indigenous people off the land. So, yeah, do you just want to maybe give us an update on the two bills that passed there and maybe what they mean for you as a cultural burner?
Yeah. So 2 pieces of legislation were passed and became effective as law in the state of California in January of 2022. And one of them, Senate Bill 332, is a piece of legislation that addresses the liability standards that the state recognizes. So California is now considered to be a gross negligence state, meaning that in terms of that legal definition, if I'm going out to burn, and I should clarify what they mean by gross negligence standard, it only applies to 2 groups of people. One is a California burn boss, and the other group of people is cultural burners. And we have very specific definitions for what a cultural burner is under the law. I don't actually have it off the top of my head to say exactly what it is. But generally speaking, we're saying it's somebody who has extensive knowledge and practice in burning. And so it's not just anybody can go out and say, I'm a cultural burner, I'm going to go throw matches on the forest,
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And is recognized by the tribe, I think, or by a affiliated tribe. Yeah.
It's recognized by various entities, is recognized within the community, I think is kind of where it's at. So somebody who's reputed for having the knowledge that they have and practice that they have, and, is very well, experienced in that kind of work. The nice thing about that particular piece of language is that obviously it kind of restricts just anybody from going out and doing a burn, setting fire. But what it does by having that specific language and having permission, as a cultural burner, you have to have permission from a landowner to go and burn. If you have a landowner's permission, then there are certain pieces of that law that don't come into requirement. As a cultural burner, you don't have to write a burn plan, for instance. The idea was that we want to be able to give tribal people the flexibility to look at a landscape and say, well, this weekend, I think we're going to have a good opportunity to go over and burn in this place. And we get out there and it's not quite right conditions, but, a half mile down the road or whatever, you've got really good conditions and you can go over to that spot and burn. Whereas if you had a burn plan written and you didn't include that spot a half mile down the road, then you'd basically be out of an opportunity to burn. Yeah. So the law is pretty nice in that sense. What it does also is, as I mentioned, is it focuses in on the liability standard. So previously, I guess maybe it doesn't matter to say previously, but what the standard is now is that provided that burner, being a cultural burner or a California certified burn boss, if they set fire and that fire gets out of control, provided that person did what a reasonable person would have done, then the suppression costs aren't borne by that person. Like that's not borne by the burner to pay that suppression cost, which is it has been a huge hindrance for people to assume that liability. So the state basically will back that burner in that regard. It doesn't alleviate certain types of it doesn't alleviate certain types of claims that a person might take. A lawyer, somebody could still bring suit basically for certain types of damages if they wanted to from an escape fire, but it changes that standard that at least we're starting to get to better language around the ability to use fire within the landscape. So now I'll talk a little bit about Assembly Bill 642, which complements SB 332. So AB 642 within the state of California's legislation allows for and recognizes, actually codifies the definitions for cultural burners and what a cultural fire is. And it does it does other things beyond that, but it codifies it and it gives an incentive for the agencies to work with cultural burners to implement and plan and give leadership to Indigenous stewardship. So it's, these are pretty monumental changes that are happening now within the state of California around that. And we also kind of building upon that also now have within the state within the last few months, the release of what we call, and I'll probably butcher the name because the name changed a couple of times while it was under editing, but I'll call it California's Strategic Plan for the Beneficial Use of Fire. And that's that's
a long one.
I'm probably within 90% right of the title on that one, but that plan also includes and supports cultural burning. And so this is a plan that's specifically focused on reducing wildfire risk and really enhancing the application of both prescribed fire and cultural fire within California. And that includes working with, not only the state government, but federal partners and local partners and whatnot in the work that we're doing. And so under that piece of legislation, or not legislation, but under that strategic plan, it is giving a place for recognition of cultural burning, and it outlines different policy pieces for what the state's trying to do to advance that. So that includes like the funding element and giving some funding to support cultural burning, and also support for like education programs to do like cultural fire workshops and trainings, around that kind of fire. So, like things have changed quite a bit, quite significantly, really over the course of basically one legislative session in the state of California. And I think that while it's not perfect, it's definitely a step in the right direction for where we want to go. So I think the next step is obviously to test some of these things, to see how they're working within the landscape, within communities, see where the pinch points are at and being able to actually apply fire. But beyond that is really to then take this piece of law from the state of California now and apply it beyond California. So if we can get it brought into our federal policies, if we can inspire folks beyond California and other states to be able to adapt their language, and internationally too. I mean, I think about you and Canada, and thinking about Ollie and Victor and other folks in Australia. It's like, where and how can we learn from each other and support each other through this kind of work, while our own countries have different processes for the way that moves forward. I think we're all poised in a way to be able to advance this, because I think that we're all seeing the writing on the wall, so to speak, or the smoke in the sky, if you want to read the smoke signals on that one. Yeah. It's happening, and we need to do something different.
Yeah, and I think it's been inspirational. When I saw it, I knew that you guys were working on it, and when I saw it passed, yeah, I was so excited because I just thought same thing, that it could have really wide reaching implications. And even just the importance that, like you said, of something as simple as defining what a cultural burn is or what a cultural burner is and how you recognize somebody. That's even just huge to get that on paper.
Yeah. Well, it poses some of its own challenges, though, too, because when we think about the training aspect of it, and I know this has come up in the state over the past year, is how do we recognize somebody is trained? It's like
who certifies
who certifies it, and that is an issue of tribal sovereignty for sure. Like a tribe has the right to say this person is trained, but you and I could both recognize that there's potential for some abuse of that. If we really think about it, like some people might just say, well, I want to do this. And I have enough stature in my tribal governance structure to have them, certify me as that person. Mm-hmm. But what happens if that person goes and does something that, like really undermines it for everybody? I think that's a risk that we have to think about, particularly if they didn't have the knowledge behind it. Like they weren't trained in a way to understand the real connections culturally to fire, or have enough knowledge about fire behavior that would be part of any traditional tribal way of teaching. Like you think about in the old days, people working as community with their youth, and families working together, and ultimately elders, as part of that system too. Like if you're not exposed to fire and you're not learning about fire and all those different levels as a lifelong learning process, and you just step into it, there could be errors that are being made, right? So, the more we work to create the opportunities to teach people around cultural burning in a way that supports the older traditions of that, so to speak, and connecting it to what I like to think about as like cultural competency in these areas, so like, why are you setting fire to that particular plant at that time of year? What are you going to get out of it? And each culture is going to have a different reason for why they might burn that plant, and a different time maybe for different specific objectives. But if you're not linking it to that cultural thing, then you're just playing with matches, maybe, right?
Yeah.
And we can't have that kind of damage, right? So do we have the opportunity to build a program around that? Yeah, we could build fire learning programs and our own certifications, if and where tribes may be less comfortable with certifying somebody within their own nation for doing that kind of work. So I'm talking out loud here a little bit about some of these things.
I just find there's such a romanticism of cultural burning. Like people just think like, oh, it sounds nice and it's a good thing to do. But like I know around here, like grass burns fast and hot in the wind. If you got a bunch of dry grass and you don't know what you're doing and you set fire to it on the wrong time, you'll be in trouble. And for me, that's kind of a thing too, where I think people hear about it and just don't understand that there really is such a knowledge base involved. Yeah,
no, and you're absolutely right. And I think, people often talk about fire being the teacher, right? Like you can learn from fire if you work gently with it and you approach it in a good way. But if you don't know, and like you let it loose, so to speak,
it'll teach you.
It'll teach you in a bad way. And, we know that from traditional stories that it can teach us in a bad way, which is why we started to use fire in the first place, right? So if we're not going to use fire to it, with that mindset, with the cultural framework for knowing, then we could be doing a lot of damage.
Yeah, we actually have a really good podcast episode on this season with Ron Good, where he talks about the importance of culture and cultural burning, and that he feels like people have kind of forgot that culture part, so they're just out burning, and then forgetting like the spiritual and the ceremonial importance of fire as well in our communities. Yeah.
And I think that's an important point too. We definitely have to connect culture to fire, and that's why I talk about like the cultural competencies. If you're out burning, what are you burning for? What are the reasons why you're burning? For myself, I'm a weaver, I'm a hunter, I fish, so it's like, if I'm burning in a certain place, I'm thinking about, well, what are the things I'm going to be able to come back in here and get out of here? If I set fire at this time of year, is that going to provide me mushrooms to come and forage for? Is it going to enhance the weaving materials that I want to collect from that place? It's not like I'm setting fire and I'm never coming back to it again. I'm thinking about, when is the next time I come back? What are the things that are going to be here? And how is that going to help me to support the culture and sustain the culture that I'm trying to maintain? And I think a lot of people often think around that idea of cultural fire that it always has to have a very, like ceremonial approach to it. Like you've got to have this big song and dance and prayer that goes before every fire, and I've burned in a lot of different communities from Australia here to stuff within our own area. And, I'm burning around my own house. And in some context, you do go out and you introduce yourself to that landscape and you make prayer because it's the first time that you're putting fire back in that place. Or maybe it happens to be a very special place within the landscape of cultural significance. And so you want to approach it in that way. But other times it's, it's like, you're simply there to maintain something and do something that is not, what do you want to say? It's not that you have to go through that process every single time. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people think that, there's always a prayer that you got to do and you got to have this certain process, a way of doing things. But, I don't know. I see in the cultures where the fire has never really gone away, I don't see that sort of thing happening. And I know that in the old days that's not what my elders told me was going on either. But, there's definitely times where you have that ceremonial fire and you have that role within it too. So
yeah, I think there's like that romanticism of it where, if you do like a drumming ceremony and sing a song before, then that's a cultural burn, whereas,
right.
Yeah, but if you're like, obliterating all the cultural resources in the area with your burn, it's not something that's good for the landscape. So yeah, I get what you're saying. And here too, in Canada, many of the nations, because of colonization, have lost that, those any sorts of stories or songs or things that have been associated with fire. I mean, the most I see is almost every time up here, I see some sort of tobacco offering or something.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much, there isn't really designated, designated, like you said, dances that you have to do before you set fire.
Right. I guess that's my point, right? Like I always make an acknowledgement to myself and to the land as I'm setting the fire. Like I'm thinking about like what the intent is, but I'm not, it's not like a formal process for doing that. It's like, okay, we're setting fire and the land and that in its own right is healing the land. It's like that in its own right could be ceremony, or it could just be something you're doing. It's like you're stepping into the kitchen and you're preparing a meal. Are you making prayer along the way with that entire step, or are you acknowledging that this is going to be medicine for people, or nourishment or whatever, and maybe you do your prayer at the end. Like we have those different times for when we do those different things, and it doesn't have to be a ceremonious occasion every single time.
Yeah, for sure. I
don't know. Maybe I'm speaking too much crazy stuff.
I don't think so. I think Matt will love it. Matt loves all this stuff.
Well, that was weird. What happened Amy?
Yeah, so sorry for the abrupt end, everyone, but just so many of the conversations that we have with the different firekeepers don't actually make it to air. Basically because, we get into some things and chatting about things that we just don't feel comfortable having out there publicly. So that's the cutoff of Don's episode.
Who was he bad-mouthing? No, I'm kidding. Yeah, but it was really cool to hear what Don was up to, though. Good to see that there's some really solid strides happening down there, and that things are moving forward in a positive way. It's great.
Yeah, that legislation that they've introduced down there, I think is game changing. So I know that there's some worries amongst different Indigenous firekeepers about how it will actually pan out, like if it'll be everything that they're hoping it will be. But I mean, for me, it's a start. And I think for us in other jurisdictions, it's a great example to follow.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's very, very cool. So yeah, thanks a lot, Don, for coming back on and doing that. We appreciate your time and your knowledge, of course.
Yeah, and we did edit your episode, Don, because I know you...
Yeah, you guys talked for like almost an hour. Amy's like, yeah, that'll be like a 15, 20-minute update. And it was like an hour I cut down to 30 minutes. Thanks for that.
yeah, no problem. Good work, Matt.
Okay, so who are we talking to in episode 7, Amy?
Yeah, so the next one, again, is another kind of different episode for us, but I really wanted to get this one on the Good Fire podcast. So there was a fire and climate conference hosted by the International Association of Wildland Fire in Pasadena, California. And that was in May, at the end of May. And there was a fantastic panel there on Indigenous firekeepers. And it was mostly young women who are working, doing research in fire and hoping, to use fire in their futures. And it was just such great talks that they gave, a great discussion. And so, yeah, they've all agreed for us to broadcast it with the Good Fire podcast. So really exciting.
Yeah, it was very cool. And even one of the women involved actually had her infant with her at the same time. So it was kind of bringing that family back into this space, right? It was cool to see that as well. Very well behaved baby. I'm impressed.
I know, that's amazing. I always try with my children, like, oh yeah, I'll just bring them along, and it never turns out as well.
Yeah, well, she did a good job. So so that's it. That's all we got for this episode. We'll see you guys next week with the panel discussion conference stuff. And because that one it was a conference, we did cut out a bunch of stuff. Like there's, they're talking about slides and stuff like that. So I got rid of all that. So hopefully it's just the meat and potatoes of it that you guys can follow along and doesn't feel like you're missing anything. So yeah. All right. We'll see you next week. A huge thank you to Canada Wildfire for their support of this podcast. As well, we would like to thank the Fighting Gunditjmara for allowing us to share their fire song Ween as the official song of Good Fire Podcast.